General Cartek's conditions were harsh but not impossible. Sarah would have 3 months to select and train a unit of 12 humans, 6 men and 6 women from various specialties within the defense corps. They would then face evaluation against a comparable unit of mixed alien species in simulated combat scenarios. Success would mean expanded human combat roles throughout the galactic military. Failure would result in formal restrictions on human participation in anything beyond support functions. The stakes couldn't have been higher. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in Training Facility 7, watching her selected candidates run through their morning exercises. She had chosen carefully, looking not for the strongest or fastest humans available, but for those who demonstrated the adaptability and creative thinking she believed were humanity's greatest military assets. Corporal James Park, formerly a maintenance technician, had caught her attention when he redesigned the station's waste recycling system to be 40% more efficient. Lieutenant Maya Okafor, a communications specialist, had once talked down a Zephyrian berserker unit that was about to fire on a civilian transport by convincing them in perfect Zephyrian that the ship contained diplomatic immunity holders. Sergeant David Kim, a medical officer, had saved 30 lives during a station emergency by using surgical tools to bypass damaged life support systems. Each member of her unit brought a different specialty, but all shared the same trait. They thought beyond conventional boundaries. "Captain," Lieutenant Okafor called out as she finished her weapons practice. "The Krillian observers are here again." Sarah looked toward the observation deck, where a group of 4-armed warriors watched the human training exercises with poorly concealed skepticism. They had been coming every day since the program began, sometimes joined by Mantrix scientists or Garathian commanders. Word had spread through the Defense Corps about the human experiment, and opinions were sharply divided. "Let them watch," Sarah replied. "They'll learn more about us than they expect." The morning's exercise was designed to test adaptive thinking under pressure. The scenario involved rescuing hostages from a fortified position while outnumbered 3-1, with limited ammunition and no heavy weapons. It was the kind of situation where traditional military doctrine called for either overwhelming force or strategic withdrawal, neither of which were options for the human unit. "Positions," Sarah called out. "Remember, we're not trying to outmuscle the enemy. We're trying to outthink them." The simulation began with the 12 humans facing 36 computer-controlled opponents of mixed species, each programmed with appropriate combat characteristics. The Krillian observers leaned forward with interest, expecting to see the humans overwhelmed within minutes. Instead, they watched Sergeant Kim use his medical knowledge to identify weak points in alien physiology, directing precise shots that incapacitated rather than killed. Lieutenant Okafor hacked into the enemy's communication frequencies, not to disrupt them, but to feed false information that split their forces. Corporal Park jury-rigged environmental controls to create diversions and cover. The human unit moved like a single organism, each member's specialty contributing to a coordinated strategy that the simulation's AI struggled to counter. They didn't fight like Krillian warriors or Zephyrian berserkers or Garathian tanks. They fought like humans, unpredictably, creatively, and with a level of coordination that impressed even their critics. 23 minutes later, all hostages were rescued and the simulated enemy force was neutralized with minimal human casualties. In the observation deck, the lead Krillian observer was frantically taking notes with all 4 hands. "Impossible," he muttered. "The tactical algorithms couldn't predict their movement patterns." "That's the point," Sarah said quietly as she approached the observation deck after the exercise. "Predictability is a liability in asymmetric warfare. We've spent 3 weeks teaching them to think like humans, not like pale imitations of alien warriors." The Krillian officer's 4 eyes focused on her with new respect. "Your techniques are unusual, Captain. How do you coordinate such complex strategies without traditional command hierarchies?" Sarah smiled. "Human military doctrine developed differently than yours. We learned to fight in small, independent units that could adapt to changing conditions without waiting for orders from above. Every member of the unit is trained to think tactically, not just follow commands. But this creates chaos," protested a Mantrix observer whose compound eyes had been tracking every movement during the exercise. "Multiple decision-makers lead to conflicting strategies." "Only if you're thinking like a Mantrix," Sarah replied respectfully. Human psychology is different. We excel at collaborative decision-making when the stakes are high. It's one of the traits that kept us alive during our evolutionary development. The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of observers from throughout the galactic military. Sarah's unit was becoming famous or infamous, depending on one's perspective. Their unconventional tactics and consistently successful mission outcomes were forcing military leaders to reconsider fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness. General Kartek himself arrived for the final week of training, accompanied by a full delegation of senior officers from across the Galactic Alliance. The atmosphere in Training Facility 7 was electric with tension as the most powerful military leaders in 3-star systems came to witness what many still considered an impossible experiment. General, Sarah reported formally as the delegation settled into the observation deck. My unit is ready for final evaluation. The general's scaled features showed no emotion. Today's scenario will be unlike anything you have faced, Captain. You will be evaluated against Elite Unit Gamma, our finest mixed-species combat team, led by Commander Vax Drethon of the Zephyrian Special Forces. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Elite Unit Gamma was legendary throughout the Defense Corps. Commander Drethon was widely considered one of the finest tactical minds in the galaxy, with a reputation for never losing a simulated engagement. His unit included the best warriors from every allied species, equipped with the most advanced weapons and trained in the most sophisticated tactics available. The scenario, General Kartek continued, will be orbital station assault. Your unit will defend. Elite Unit Gamma will attack. The station contains critical intelligence that must not fall into enemy hands. Standard military doctrine allows for the destruction of the station if capture becomes inevitable. The implications were clear. Sarah's human unit would be facing the galactic military's elite forces in a scenario designed to favor the attackers. Even traditional military units struggled with station defense against superior forces. For her experimental human unit, it would be the ultimate test. Rules of engagement? Sarah asked. Standard combat simulation protocols. Stunner weapons only, but full damage modeling. Casualties will be treated as permanent for scoring purposes. Mission duration, maximum 2 hours. Commander Drethon stepped forward from the observation deck, his Zephyrian features showing the predatory satisfaction of a hunter who has cornered his prey. Captain Chen, he said formally, I have followed your unit's progress with interest. Today you will face opponents who will not underestimate human creativity. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Commander Drethon, I look forward to the challenge. As the two units prepared for the simulation, Sarah gathered her people for a final briefing. Around them, the training facility was being reconfigured to match the specifications of a typical orbital research station. Multiple levels, narrow corridors, critical systems that could be targeted for tactical advantage. Listen carefully, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely carrying beyond her 12-person unit. Today isn't about proving we can fight like aliens. It's about proving that fighting like humans is better. Sergeant Kim raised his hand. Orders, Captain. Sarah smiled grimly. Forget everything traditional military doctrine says about station defense. We're not going to hold static positions or fight a battle of attrition. We're going to do what humans do best: adapt, improvise, and survive. As the simulation countdown began, Sarah took one last look at the observation deck, where dozens of alien military leaders waited to see whether humanity would earn its place among the galaxy's warriors or be relegated forever to support roles. The timer hit 0, and the battle for humanity's future began. The first phase of the assault unfolded exactly as Commander Drethon had planned. Elite Unit Gamma approached the orbital station with textbook precision, Krillian warriors providing suppressing fire with multiple weapons, while Mantrix infiltrators used their enhanced visual systems to identify defensive positions. Garathian assault specialists prepared to breach the main airlocks, their thick hides offering protection against expected defensive fire. What they encountered instead was silence. Scans show the station is fully powered, reported the units. Mantrix sensor specialist, his compound eyes reflecting confusion. Life signs confirm 12 defenders present, but they're not at any of the expected defensive positions. Commander Drethon's tail twitched with annoyance. Traditional station defense involved creating choke points at airlocks and main corridors, forcing attackers to advance through carefully prepared kill zones. The absence of any such preparation suggested either incompetence or something far more dangerous, a trap he couldn't yet identify. Proceed with standard breach protocols, he ordered. Maintain alertness for irregular tactics. In the observation deck, General Kartek watched the tactical displays with intense focus. The holographic representation of the station showed Elite Unit Gamma advancing through the outer hull while Sarah's human defenders appeared to be scattered throughout the facility with no apparent coordination. Curious deployment, murmured Commander Thys, her mandibles clicking with scientific interest. Human positioning appears random, almost chaotic, or adaptive, General Kartek replied slowly. Watch carefully. I suspect we are about to learn something about human military psychology. Elite Unit Gamma breached the station's primary airlock, with overwhelming force expecting immediate resistance. Instead, they found themselves in empty corridors that should have been heavily defended. Their advance continued deeper into the station, past junction points and defensive positions that remained mysteriously unoccupied. Too easy, Commander, Drethan muttered, his predatory instincts warning him of danger he couldn't yet identify. Weapons ready. They're planning something. He was absolutely right. Sarah had positioned her unit not to defend the station in any traditional sense, but to turn the entire facility into a weapon against the attackers. Corporal Park had spent the preparation time mapping every system, every vulnerability, every potential advantage the station's infrastructure could provide. Lieutenant Okafor had identified ways to manipulate environmental controls, communications, and even artificial gravity. The other team members had each been assigned specific roles that played to their individual strengths rather than following standard military specializations. The trap was sprung when Elite Unit Gamma reached the station's central hub. Sergeant Kim, using his medical knowledge of alien physiology, had calculated exactly how much atmospheric pressure change would disorient each species without causing permanent harm. As the attackers entered the hub, he triggered a rapid decompression that left the Mantrix fighters struggling with their sensitive respiratory systems, while the Garathians' heavy builds made them clumsy in the sudden low-pressure environment. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Okafor activated a cascade of false emergency signals that filled the attackers' helmet displays with confusing information. The Krillians, who relied heavily on their technological displays for coordination, found themselves firing at phantom targets while their actual enemies remained invisible. But the real genius of Sarah's strategy revealed itself when the human defenders finally engaged. They didn't fight like a traditional defensive unit. They fought like guerrilla specialists who had turned the station itself into their weapon. Environmental controls created pockets of zero gravity that favored human adaptability over alien physical advantages. Maintenance tunnels that were too small for larger alien species became highways for rapid redeployment. Emergency lighting was manipulated to create shadows and blind spots that human eyes, adapted for varied lighting conditions, could navigate better than alien visual systems optimized for specific environments. Most importantly, the humans fought as individuals who thought collectively, rather than as a unit following centralized commands. When Commander Drethan tried to predict their movements using standard tactical algorithms, he found himself constantly surprised by decisions that seemed illogical until their cumulative effect became apparent. Impossible, he snarled as his supposedly elite unit found itself systematically outmaneuvered by opponents who should have been overwhelmed within minutes. They're violating every principle of coordinated military action. No, came Sarah's voice over the communication system, which Lieutenant Okafor had hacked to allow the defenders to monitor attacker frequencies. We're demonstrating that your principles don't account for how humans actually think and fight. The battle continued for another hour, with Elite Unit Gamma's traditional advantages proving useless against tactics they had never encountered. Every time Commander Drethan adapted to counter one human strategy, the defenders shifted to something completely different. They used medical equipment as weapons, turned maintenance protocols into tactical advantages, and coordinated complex maneuvers without any apparent command structure. Most frustrating of all, they did it with evident enjoyment. The humans were clearly having fun, treating the simulation as an intellectual puzzle to be solved, rather than a military engagement to be won through superior force. When the simulation finally ended, Elite Unit Gamma had been systematically eliminated with 0 human casualties. Commander Drethan found himself stunned unconscious by an improvised weapon cobbled together from medical equipment and maintenance supplies, while his supposedly invincible unit had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought by 12 humans who had rewritten the rules of engagement in real time. The silence in the observation deck was deafening. General Kartek stared at the tactical displays showing the final positions, his expression unreadable. Around him, senior officers from across the Galactic Alliance tried to process what they had witnessed. The humans had not just won, they had demonstrated a completely different approach to warfare that made traditional tactics appear primitive by comparison. Commander Thys was the first to speak, her voice filled with scientific excitement. "Magnificent," she chittered. "They didn't fight the simulation, they rewrote it. Every assumption about station defense, every principle of tactical coordination, every expectation about human limitations, all proven irrelevant." "Irrelevant," General Kartek repeated slowly. "Or evolved." Sarah emerged from the station simulation chamber, followed by her 11 team members who were grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. She approached the observation deck, where dozens of the galaxy's most powerful military leaders waited for her explanation of what they had just witnessed. "General," she reported formally, "mission completed successfully, station defended, intelligence preserved, attacking force neutralized." "How?" Commander Drethan's voice carried frustration and genuine curiosity as he joined the group, his pride, clearly wounded but his tactical mind fascinated by what had happened. Sarah looked around at the assembled officers, knowing that her answer would determine not just her unit's future, but humanity's entire role in galactic military affairs. "We fought like humans," she said simply. "Not like aliens pretending to be human, but like the species we actually are, adaptive, creative, collaborative, and willing to rewrite the rules when the situation demands it." General Kartek stepped forward, his burning gaze fixed on Sarah with something approaching respect. "Captain Chen," he said formally, "your experimental unit has exceeded all expectations, but demonstrations and battlefield reality are different things. Are you prepared to take this theory into actual combat?" Sarah met his gaze without hesitation. "General, we've been preparing our entire species' history for this moment. The question isn't whether we're ready for combat, it's whether the galaxy is ready for what humans can accomplish when we're finally allowed to fight as ourselves." The general's features shifted into what might have been approval. "Then perhaps it is time to find out." 3 months later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the GDS horizon, watching the tactical displays as her expanded human combat units prepared for their first real engagement. What had begun as an experimental program with 12 volunteers had grown into a full division of 300 human warriors, each trained in the adaptive tactics that were already reshaping galactic military doctrine. The enemy they faced was unlike anything the Galactic Defense Corps had encountered before. The Devourers, as intelligence had named them, were a collective intelligence that consumed entire star systems, converting matter and energy into more of themselves. Traditional military approaches had failed catastrophically against them. They adapted to conventional tactics faster than Allied forces could implement them. "Captain," Lieutenant Okafor reported from her position at the communication station, "all human units report ready. Alien allies are maintaining support positions as requested." Sarah nodded, studying the sensor readings that showed the massive Devourer fleet approaching their defensive perimeter. 50 ships of varying sizes, each one a living weapon that could reshape itself in response to threats. Against such an enemy, predictability was death and adaptation was survival. Exactly the kind of warfare humans had been preparing for their entire evolutionary history. "General Kartek," Sarah addressed the Zephyrian commander who had insisted on personally observing this first major human combat operation, "recommend we begin deployment." The general's scaled features showed the tension of a leader whose entire military philosophy was being tested in real combat. "Proceed, Captain. The fate of 3 star systems depends on your success." Sarah activated the fleet-wide communication system, knowing that her words would be heard not just by the human units under her command, but by thousands of alien allies who were still learning to trust humanity's unconventional approaches to warfare. All human units. This is Captain Chen. Today we face an enemy that has defeated every traditional military force sent against it. The Devourers adapt to standard tactics, overwhelm conventional strategies, and consume everything in their path. They represent exactly the kind of impossible situation humans have been overcoming for millennia. She paused, watching as the enemy fleet continued its approach, sensor readings showing the Devourer ships beginning to shift and change in response to the Allied defensive formation. "We will not fight this battle like Krillians or Zephyrians or Garathians," Sarah continued. "We will fight it like humans. Every unit has complete tactical autonomy. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember, we don't need to be stronger than them. We just need to be more adaptable." The battle began with the Devourer's standard assault pattern, a coordinated advance designed to test Allied defenses and identify weaknesses to exploit. What they encountered instead was chaos that somehow worked. Perfectly human units scattered across the battlefield in patterns that appeared random but followed a deeper logic, based on fluid adaptation rather than rigid formation. When Devourer ships tried to focus their adaptive responses on specific threats, they found that the humans had already shifted to different tactics. When the collective intelligence attempted to predict human behavior, based on previous engagements, it discovered that humans had no consistent behavioral patterns to analyze. From the bridge of the horizon, Sarah watched her people demonstrate everything she had tried to explain to the galactic military establishment. Sergeant Kim's medical unit was using knowledge of biological systems to identify and target the organic components that held Devourer ships together. Corporal Park's engineering teams were jury-rigging weapons and defenses in real time, creating solutions that couldn't be predicted or countered because they were being invented on the spot. Most importantly, the human units were fighting as a collective intelligence of their own, not the hive mind approach that had made the Devourers so successful, but something uniquely human. Individual creativity combined with collaborative coordination, each unit making independent decisions that somehow supported the overall strategy without any central command directing them. "Impossible," General Kartek muttered as he watched the tactical displays. "They're operating as hundreds of independent units, but their actions are more coordinated than our most disciplined formations." "That's human psychology," Sarah explained as she directed her flagship into the heart of the enemy formation. "We evolved as social creatures who could think independently while working collectively. Every human unit out there is making their own tactical decisions, but they're all thinking about how those decisions affect everyone else." The Devourer fleet was beginning to show signs of confusion as their adaptive algorithms struggled to counter tactics that changed faster than they could analyze them. Ships that had reconfigured to counter human energy weapons found themselves facing kinetic projectiles. Collective intelligence nodes that adapted to resist electronic warfare discovered that humans had switched to using their own biological neural networks as weapons guidance systems. "Captain," Lieutenant Okafor called out, "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from the Devourer command ship. They're trying to initiate some kind of cascade absorption protocol." Sarah's blood went cold as she recognized the implications. The Devourers were preparing to consume the entire battlefield, ships, stations, even the nearby asteroid belt, to gain enough mass and energy for a final, overwhelming assault. It was their ultimate tactic, one that had destroyed entire star systems when conventional forces had driven them to desperation. "All units," Sarah broadcast on emergency frequencies. "The enemy is preparing total consumption protocol. This is exactly the kind of impossible situation humans specialize in. Time to show the galaxy what we're really capable of." What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, instead of retreating or attempting to disrupt the Devourer protocol through conventional means. The human units did something unprecedented. They let the enemy begin the consumption process, then turned it against itself. Engineering teams led by Corporal Park had identified the quantum resonance frequencies that the Devourers used to break down matter. Instead of trying to block these frequencies, they amplified them and fed them back into the Devourer ships themselves. Medical units targeted the biological components with precisely calculated doses of their own absorption energy, causing the Devourers to literally consume themselves communication specialist hacked into the collective intelligence network and introduced paradoxical logic loops that human brains could process, but that caused the devourer hive mind to crash trying to resolve impossible contradictions. Most spectacularly, the human fighters began using the devourer's own consumption fields as weapons, maneuvering enemy ships into positions where they would accidentally absorb each other while trying to target the elusive human forces. The battle ended not with a massive explosion or heroic last stand, but with the devourer fleet simply ceasing to exist, as they became trapped in recursive consumption loops that fed back on themselves until nothing remained but empty space and scattered energy. Readings. Silence filled the communication channels as the magnitude of what had happened sank in. The devourers, the unstoppable force that had consumed 3-star systems and defeated every military force sent against them, had been not just defeated but completely eliminated by human tactics that no one had thought possible. General Kartek was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and respect that Sarah had never heard from him before. "Captain Chen," he said formally, "I owe you and your species an apology. We spent centuries underestimating human potential because we measured you against our own limitations." Sarah smiled as she watched her units begin rescue and recovery operations, automatically shifting from combat mode to humanitarian assistance without needing orders. "General, you gave us the opportunity to prove ourselves. That's all we ever asked for. And now?" the general asked. "What does humanity want from the Galactic Defense Corps?" Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew, human and alien working together as equals for the first time in galactic history. "We want to be partners, not subordinates. We want to contribute our strengths to the Alliance, not hide them to make others comfortable. And we want other species to learn from us, just as we've learned from you." In the months that followed, the transformation of galactic military doctrine was swift and comprehensive. Human tactical innovations were integrated into training programs across all species. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated military thinking for centuries gave way to more flexible, adaptive approaches. Most importantly, the assumptions about what different species could and couldn't do were replaced by a genuine appreciation for diverse strengths. Sarah found herself promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the new Adaptive Warfare Division, where humans and aliens worked together to develop tactics for threats that conventional military thinking couldn't address. The shooting range where she had first proved herself was converted into a monument to human achievement, but more importantly, to the principle that potential should never be limited by prejudice. The inscription above the entrance read simply, "Here, one human woman split the bullseye and changed the galaxy.